Hello, everyone. My name is Carissa Harris. I'm director of the Northern California Center of Occupational Environmental Health at UC Berkeley and associate director of research for the California Labor Lab. It's a pleasure to be here with you. This next panel is going to be facilitated by Suzanne Teran, who's the director of the Labor Occupational Health Program at UC Berkeley. She has focused much of her work on addressing immigrant workers' health and safety and developing a variety of strategies to improve working conditions. She has extensive experience developing participatory training programs and low literacy materials in Spanish and English, and conducting qualitative research through research partnerships with community and worker organizations. She has an MPH in Community Health Education from UC Berkeley and a Bachelor of Science in Biology from Yale University. And she will be facilitating the group with Victor Rubin. Dr. Rubin is a consultant to the California Labor Lab on policy opportunities arising from the research. He retired in 2022 from PolicyLink, a national nonprofit institute advancing equitable policy change, where he had been vice president for research. He was an adjunct associate professor of city and regional planning at the University of California, Berkeley, in the department where he earned his MCP and PhD. He serves on the advisory council for the Center of Community Engagement with UC San Francisco and the National Advisory Council for RWJF Interdisciplinary Research Leaders Program. Thank you so much for being here and facilitating this committee.
Great, thank you, Carissa. And welcome to this afternoon's panel, where we're really going to get a chance to talk a little bit about what comes next, reflecting on the conversation so far this morning. And we're very fortunate to have panelists who are going to come from different perspectives to help us with this discussion. And the objectives, is it okay? Of this afternoon's session are really to identify or highlight some of the key issues when we think about good jobs and healthy work environments. What are some of the key issues facing workers and employers today, as well as what do we do about it? What are some of the key policy changes or some of the key areas that we should focus on for policy initiatives? So I'm going to introduce the panelists. And first we have Elmer Lizardi, who is a legislative advocate with the California Federation of Labor Unions. And in that role, he works and specializes in worker health and safety, wage theft and labor law enforcement, unemployment insurance and workers' compensation, and immigration-related issues. We also have Liba Wenig Rubenstein, who is a director of the Economic Opportunities Program with the Future of Work initiative at the Aspen Institute, and is co-founder of its Business Roundtable on Organized Labor. And in this role, she works to bridge the gap between American workers and business leaders to shape a future of shared prosperity and resilient democracy. I love that mission. It's great. And we also have Sarah Bohn, who is Vice President and Director of the Public Policy Institute of California, and she of the Public Policy Institute Economic Policy Center, and she's a labor economist, and in that role she leads research and engagement to inform California policymaking to support greater opportunity and upward mobility for workers, families, and businesses statewide. So welcome, first of all, to our three panelists. And just to start off or kick off the discussion, I'd like to give each of you the opportunity, again, thinking of those goals of providing good jobs, providing healthy work environments, and thinking about what's impacting workers and employers. What are some of the 2 or 3 key issues that we should be focusing on in the policy arena? Maybe we'll just go in this order that you're sitting, and can start with Elmer.
Can everyone hear me? Is this working? Great. Thank you for having me. I think for me, 2 or 3 issues. First and foremost, I think heard this in the previous panel, but AI and advancing, tech tools is the most pressing issue, I think, for workers currently. We represent over 2.8 million workers in the state of California, over 1,200 unions. And in the past several years, this issue of AI has become one, if not the most important issue that our unions keep raising to us, is something that we need to tackle. The second thing I would raise is corporate consolidation. I think, especially in California now, when there's a lot of discussions about affordability in the state, the issue of corporate consolidation is a much bigger part of that discussion that I think maybe doesn't get as much play. And because regardless of industry, right, this consolidation obviously hurts consumers because prices for goods are controlled by a smaller and smaller group of companies. But then at the same time, from the worker perspective, when you have higher consolidation of market power, there's a higher likelihood that corporations can then use monopolistic practices to suppress wages, to intimidate or scare workers. And of course, all that makes it a lot harder for workers to organize and unionize in those industries. And then finally, one other thing that I would highlight, because it's always an issue for the Labor Fed, is labor law enforcement. Currently, unfortunately, we do have a bit of a enforcement crisis in California. A lot of our state agencies are understaffed, underfunded, and it makes it a lot more difficult for us to, boast about the great laws that we've passed if we aren't actually seeing fruitful outcomes for the workers on a day-to-day basis in their workplaces, right? And then I think one last bit to touch on that, it's even more important for us to focus on state enforcement of labor law when we're seeing our federal counterparts not only maybe move in the opposite direction of protecting workers, but then also gutting the agencies that are supposed to be enforcing these laws as well, right? So because of that, our state enforcement is even that much more important. And I think all these three things I would highlight as key issues for the labor movement.
Thank you. Thank you to the Labor Lab for including PPIC in this conversation. And I found the morning really enlightening. I learned a lot, and it was moving as well. So it turns out some economists do have a heart. I really appreciate your work. I'm going to go kind of big picture and just highlight two things that, we're talking about for the next administration, especially to really be paying attention to. And one is kind of really big picture, and that is that the workforce is shrinking relative to the population. So in the next 20 years or so, we'll have, more dependent age Californians, young and old, relative to workers than we've had since like the 1950s or 60s. Of course, in the 50s and 60s, that's because we had a lot of young people, the baby boom. Now it's because we'll have a lot of older adults. And, that, of course, that raises a whole host of policy questions that we know that the state and the next administration will need to pay attention to. But for the world of work, we're thinking about how, this creates an imperative for more people who want to be able to work. So addressing some of the barriers, whether it's, childcare, elder care, health, safety, access to skills, all of those things that still are at play in our workforce or in our potential workforce will be critical for the state to have the workers that it needs to kind of meet the services and the quality of life that both the older adult population and all of us like to have in California, and just the ability to create more economic security for more people through work. The second kind of big picture issue that we're kind of talking with state leaders about is affordability, as you mentioned too. Definitely a political buzzword right now, and I know it's being utilized for kind of political purposes in many ways, but for us, looking at the data and talking with Californians, we think the kind of real underlying issue is about stagnating labor market opportunities, which is a current issue that we've, for the last few years has been the reality in California and also in a lot of the country. Just not a lot of movement in the job market, not a lot of new jobs and growth, which creates challenges for workers. But over the long term, we're thinking about how our economy is creating the kinds of jobs that Californians want that can boost their kind of economic mobility over time. So for sure, the next administration will be needing to, and the current, elected leaders of our state are focused a lot on what they can do on affordability on both kind of the earnings side, on the price side. And I think, this will put pressure, as you were talking about, Elmer, on on employers whose margins are shrinking as costs of doing business increase, and same way on the household side, where you're kind of maybe pressured to make choices, accept jobs or things that put you at risk in various ways just to make ends meet. So we're concerned about those trends, how it affects families, businesses, and kind of what it means for kind of prospects for California going forward, and remaining competitive, creating more opportunities, but not at the expense of workers.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. And my train was a little late this morning, so I missed a little bit of it. But the work that you all do is so critical, and I'm grateful for you being here and for having me. I'm going to go even more big picture because the work that I do is not specific to California, although I think California becomes sort of emblematic both on the challenges and the opportunities side, and opportunities to innovate to solve some of these challenges. When I think about policy around work and workers to tackle what is coming, what I think about is the need for a new social contract around work in this country. And that is in part for the sake of economic dynamism and fairness and justice, but it's also about like the fundamental functioning of our democracy. And I think work in many ways is the locus, is the place where the sort of like macro theoretical economy and the lived economy like come to meet each other and either ring true to folks or create like real tension and dissonance for people. And I think what we've seen is that work is, for too many people, not the source of security, fairness, a basis of supporting your family, being civically engaged, and having a sense of agency in your life that it's promised to be. And so when I think about the policy landscape, I'm thinking pretty broadly about all of the pieces of that social contract. I think AI becomes really relevant here, not because the conversation about AI is bringing a lot of these questions to the forefront. Now, it's not the first time we've had some of these issues, really front and center. COVID was another sort of crisis that could have been an opportunity where we started to talk about the role of work in our society and caregiving and essential work. And, very quickly we tried to pretend that never happened, but it did give us glimpses of what's possible on a policy front when there is political will and a sense of urgency. And so I think, given that what we're seeing from AI is is sort of uncertain and not temporary, with my optimistic hats on, I think it's an opportunity to have a conversation about the way that the social contract has been eroded over the last several decades, and create some urgency around repairing and reimagining it for the 21st century.
Thank you. So we heard about the traditional safety net for protection of employees from the ravages of unregulated work and an economy that wouldn't pay attention to their basic needs and safety and health and security unless it was regulated. And then we began to learn quite a bit from the Labor Lab's own survey research and other sources about the changes in the nature of work, app-based employment, gig employment more generally, contract work, part-time work that's involuntary, multiple jobs, algorithmic scheduling, other problems of shift work, the whole range of things. So given what you know about those changes from your own work and what you've heard here, and the risks that workers are increasingly taking. What aspects of these social safety nets, past or present or upcoming, are you focusing on, or what are you recommending, or is most important to focus on in that respect? This is for Sarah and then Liba.
Thank you, Victor, for that question. Our work focuses on a couple sorts of safety net interventions. The one that we are kind of increasingly focused on now is, I don't know, maybe in our traditional work, we wouldn't call this safety net, but I'm thinking of it as a safety net for workers in transition because of the demographic change that I mentioned that's upon us, the AI and other technological kind of transformation that workers will be navigating. Thinking about how the programs that Secretary Knox spoke about, job training, displaced worker programs, wage subsidies, unemployment insurance, thinking about how all of those safety nets for workers navigating change could work better, given over decades of technological transformation that was maybe a little bit slower, computers, information, all of that, nonetheless had huge impacts on how workers navigate a really shifting labor market, and not in ways I think that the programs didn't fully kind of support or help workers really navigate that as well as they could. Another strand of work at PPIC looks at poverty, and after over 10 years of work just measuring poverty in California, it's clear that that poverty in California is working poverty. 80% of families who are poor have at least one worker in their household. Safety net programs, the traditional big cash aid, food assistance, we estimate keep about 600,000 workers in California out of poverty. Mostly that's coming from kind of large-scale federal programs, earned income tax credit, cash, food assistance, and the like. As was talked about in the prior panel, or the discussion with Secretary Knox, concerns about H.R. 1 that's imposing work requirements, is a big focus of our work at PPIC. Just knowing this intersection of work and social safety net programs, just to really kind of help many workers and working families make ends meet. This is going to be particularly severe for workers who don't have children, because they are less targeted by many of these programs to begin with, and adults who are will be facing additional work requirements. So I've strayed a little bit from your question, but I'm really interested in the intersection of some of these large-scale state and federal traditional safety net programs, the intersection of that with kind of the worker-focused safety net that I mentioned that's really helping workers navigate change, because there are, these programs aren't necessarily designed to work together, and so individuals can face cliffs or barriers or kind of disincentives, as well as the fact that kind of implementing these programs and safety nets is through a host of different agencies, that, I'm inspired by Secretary Knox's comment of how he's kind of coordinated some to work together just in the farm worker space. And I think we'll need that much more broadly going forward if we're going to have a safety net that really helps California workers.
Thank you.
Thanks. I will build on that. We are not pursuing or advocating specific policies, but we are thinking about the principles that underline the kind of policies that we need to see going forward, and around which we need to build coalitions that include enlightened business leaders. And when I think about kind of all the policy frameworks that are out there that try to adapt and reimagine our social contract around work for the 21st century, they all really have the kind of three elements in them. One is setting a floor, which is kind of, as you say, kind of traditionally where we've talked about the safety net, but I think we can think about the safety net as a little bit more broad than that. The floor to your point, I think floor is probably not the right term. A colleague of mine has talked about guaranteed income and other sort of safety net policies as a trampoline, like it's actually what allows people to have the security that can kind of launch them if they want, and if they have the other opportunities to like real mobility. And then there's elements of voice and power. And this is where a lot of our work focuses, because I think it's been, we're really trying to build a constituency through the Business Roundtable and organized labor of business leaders who see worker power as a critical part of economic and democratic functioning, and are engaged in experiments in their own organizations or in coalition with others, partnering with unions, and other forms of kind of shared governance and shared decision making that can kind of prove out the business case and erode a little bit of the business, kind of the monolithic opposition to worker power that has existed over the last several decades. And we see a lot of experiments, and we need to see more in shared governance, whether that's at the sector level, at the state level, or on a firm level, especially around AI. We have a model in Pennsylvania. We have Microsoft's partnership with the AFL-CIO, which is a few different manifestations between Microsoft and member unions. We have a member who has a worker elected representative on their board. So I think there's various models of shared voice that we're really interested in lifting up. And then there's sharing in the benefits, which I think, again, AI opens a conversation that is a conversation, the principles of which we should have been, and some of us have been having for a long time. But, given the potential for like real aggregate, like concentrated benefits and socialized risks, there is a conversation around AI in flipping that equation and thinking about how we concentrate the risks and responsibilities among the few companies that ostensibly know more about this than legislators do or the rest of us do, and therefore they're the ones who need to make decisions and socialize the benefits. And there are a lot of models that are being proposed, but those are, that's an element of this sort of policy framework that I think we need to be innovating around and pursuing.
Thank you for setting the stage with those principles. And I now want to turn to Elmer and have a chance. We'd love for you to orient us a bit to what some of the legislative priorities are, what the Labor Fed is advancing this year.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And and I will basically only be speaking to state level policy, because that's really what we are focusing on here with the Labor Fed in California. But I think I could speak all day about our ledge agenda. We actually are, we're co-sponsoring 14 bills this year, 2/3 of which are actually directly related to AI and the issues which they are bringing to a lot of our member unions and just workers generally, unionized or not, right? A big portion of what we are focusing on with our AI bills is just making sure that we're reestablishing or just establishing at the forefront basic worker technology rights for the 21st century, because as has been spoken about, right, the work landscape is changing. And the way we've been thinking about this is, with feedback from our unions over the last several years, trying to focus all the issues in kind of two buckets. The first bucket is, we have AI surveillance and the automated management of workers, right? And that's kind of like the first bucket. And then the second bucket is like the actual, de-skilling of work or task automation or the actual threat of job displacement, right? And so I won't go through every single one of our bills, but I do want to highlight maybe one or two in each of these buckets so you can get a sense of the types of tangible changes that we want to see that will actually create meaningful protections and guardrails for workers on the use of AI in the workplace. For worker surveillance, for example, we have a bill, AB 1898, with Assemblymember Schultz. This is our Workplace AI Right to Know Act, right? Very straightforward, just requiring employers to give workers advance notice when they are going to be implementing these types of tools in the workplace, right? Whether we're talking about AI surveillance or tools that are gathering worker data, right? So that workers understand what data is being extracted from them, how is that data being used, and the methods by which that data is being extracted, right? And this is especially critical right now because we're seeing instances where workers are telling us that they are being informed of the fact that they were being surveilled, and they didn't even know that this technology was in the workplace until after they're being informed, like right now, oh, FYI, we are reprimanding you for X, Y, and Z. And these workers they weren't even aware that these tools were being implemented in their workplace. And then another bill that we're working on is SB 947 McNerney. This is a bill in the Senate, which is our No Robot Bosses Act, right? This is a bill to ensure that we have human oversight and corroborating evidence whenever these algorithmic management tools or automated decision-making tools are being used to make these really critical decisions like firing decisions or, reprimanding of workers. Ultimately, we think that these decisions require oversight, and workers should not have to fear that, these potentially biased AI systems are going to be making these decisions unilaterally. Then secondly, on kind of that second bucket.
Your microphone might be dying.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
A little switch. Can you guys hear me? Great. And then on that second bucket, two bills. The first one is SB 951 with Senator Reyes. This is our AI job killer notice. Another very straightforward bill. We're seeing large companies now very broadly stating that they're planning to lay off huge portions of their workforce, right? We just saw recently Meta said that they're planning to fire up to upwards of 10% of their workforce due to AI. So this bill, what we're trying to ensure is that workers receive notice, right, from their employers that they plan to be replaced or laid off, and also to ensure that local governments in the state are aware of these layoff notices as well, just so that workers are able to plan, right, for the future and to ensure that if they can, to possibly maybe even bid for jobs in that company. And then one last bill that I'll flag for you all is AB 2027 Ward. This bill would prohibit employers from selling or using worker data to train AI to replicate, automate, or replace the human workers in their jobs. This is, a direct way to really protect the workers who are the most impacted by the proliferation of AI in the workplace, right? We're already seeing it in spaces like call center workers or workers who are like academic editors, for example, right? Where they're in there, they're sharing their expertise to make sure that they can, help young and up and coming workers in the workforce. Meanwhile, all of their data is then being used to eliminate their job. So these are some of the bills that we're working on. We do have some non-AI related bills. If folks are interested, I'm happy to speak with you all afterwards on some of those others. But I really want to just highlight these because, one of the main topics we've been discussing is just the changing landscape of work. And these are some of the few tangible things that we see that can affect everyone across the board, regardless of sector. So.
Great, thank you.
I know, Liba, you said you don't work on specific policies, but provide the principles for the frameworks and values. I'll give you and Sarah first, and Liba, however you want to respond to it, just whether there are any policy areas or specific policies, maybe not as fine detailed as Elmer just was, but at whatever level you're comfortable, that are important to your centers and your organizations on these topics at this time. And it can be either California specific or national.
So one of the frameworks that we're building our research around at PPIC is, for greater economic opportunity, we need to ensure that California is creating the kinds of jobs that Californians want and need, and that Californians have access to them. So on the, this might not be the most popular topic of the day, but we are working on that kind of job creation side. So looking at regulation, there are a couple of bills. We don't take positions or advocate for policy or directly in California, but that are thinking about the state's level of regulation and whether it's achieving its aims, as opposed to kind of the outweighing costs that can actually mute the creation of jobs in California. I think everyone is familiar with kind of how slow growth in housing kind of curtails kind of activity. It can actually, impede kind of workers being able to live close to their jobs, and a whole host of considerations that for me are not just about like, we want growth and we want to businesses to be able to kind of do what they want. It's about achieving the kind of social aims and economic aims in aggregate for California. So we are looking at some of that side of the equation. And, on the other side, of course, it's not as specific as what Elmer mentioned, but, in terms of Californians being able to access the kind of work that they want, I mentioned this at the outset, just thinking of we've done some work looking at the constraints that face Californians today who maybe would like to work more or would like to be more full participants in the labor market, and childcare is one of the big issues. Elder care, transportation, health, of course. So actually the Labor Center, the Labor Lab is a great model for how to think about that nexus of health and work. And we're trying to use kind of, the model that you've built to think about in other areas as well, because work is kind of at the core of it, but, household dynamics, if you have access to quality childcare that's affordable, if you have access to transportation and housing, all of these things really add up to kind of the concerns that we have today about the workforce and Californians being able to be upwardly mobile through work. So we're focused a lot on those kind of household pieces of the story. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention education, workforce development, and training is a huge part of our agenda. In fact, we collaborate with the PPIC Higher Education Center to think about the state's major investments in training and education. The Secretary Knox mentioned dual enrollment. It is a big piece of PPIC research. So we're thinking about kind of the next layer of education and job training to prepare more Californians for what's ahead in the workforce.
Thank you.
I would say the areas of policy that we're most engaged in, tracking, trying to lift up examples and understand what works and what doesn't in order to replicate the best versions. There's a few of them. One, historically, the Future of Work Initiative launched at the Aspen Institute just over 10 years ago and was in its early days one of the kind of innovators around portable benefits, which, obviously it can be controversial and really matters how it's implemented, but seems to be sort of finding its moment now, a decade later. And so that's certainly something that we're looking at. And I think while classification is a really important issue, there's no question that connecting, family sustaining benefits to traditional employment is probably not like the only and best way to deliver those benefits to all of our workforce. And so we need to innovate around that. Another that kind of comes under the Future of Work umbrella, and we work on quite a bit in our roundtable, but also my colleagues at the Economic Opportunities Program have really have an expertise in this, is employee ownership, forms of shared ownership models, profit sharing, ESOPs, employee ownership trusts, and co-ops. And obviously this is, it gets at a lot of kind of core issues around aligned interests, shared prosperity, long-term wealth building, as well as agency, and sort of mechanics of ownership and sort of the culture of ownership and the benefits of those to workers, firms, and communities. And then, definitely tracking training, especially where private sector and unions come together. There's a lot of really successful training models, like longstanding training models that we are very hopeful and kind of encouraging and involved in adapting those models to AI, including the AFT's partnership with Microsoft, OpenAI, and Anthropic, which brings the labs in direct contact with teachers, both to educate them so that they can decide how AI is used in their classrooms and what policies, but also to give feedback to the AI developers so that they are actually solving problems that teachers want solved with their products. So it is a really nice kind of two-way mutual benefit relationship. We're also tracking new forms of building retirement security through employee ownership, but also in careers that do not look traditional, that are not built with one company for a very long time. There are new mechanisms emerging around mini retirements, sabbaticals, like forms of kind of intermittent work, and what are the financial mechanisms that allow for that kind of retraining, shifting in mid-career that most of Gen Alpha expects that that's what their careers are going to look like, even in the best case scenario. And then we really focus a lot on tripartite and other forms of, again, shared decision making and management, where workers and their representatives, industry and government are all at the table. Obviously one example of that is whose outcome is still to be determined is the Fast Food Council in California. And that's something that members of ours were advocates for passing initially, and that we are tracking closely and, hope to learn from to see how bodies like this, and again, there's another one in Pennsylvania around AI. So there are a lot of examples of these that we're really interested in, because we think that those tables where labor and business come together as equals are really critical to forging the new social contract that we need.
Liba. I feel like we could dive into each of those examples in such more depth, but I think we're going to have a couple more questions for the panel and then also open it up to see if there's questions from the audience. Does that sound right, Michelle, timing-wise? So back to Elmer, I just want to thinking about sort of some of the current threats that that workers are facing in terms of job cuts. And so what are a couple of strategies that the Labor Fed is suggesting or advancing in order to promote jobs, to maintain the skilled workforce, and also really promote good, healthy jobs?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Honestly, I think that even in just speaking about some of the bills that we're working on, you can already see the thread of these strategies that we're employing, and really tackling the frontline issues that our unions have told us are most important to them, right? I think ultimately on the job cut issue, or the threat of these massive displacement from AI and automated decision-making technology, right, poses the largest threat. And if we want to see workers protected in any way, we just have to focus on implementing proper guardrails on its use in the workplace. The only way that we can really protect the core function of the human workforce is to protect that human decision making, which is so critical to them being able to do their jobs well, right? And that's a key link in a lot of the bills that we're working on. And this is especially critical in industries where we have professionals who have, dedicated their lives, decades of their lives to being experts in their field, being experts in their career, right? All this training and education to be able to do these jobs well. We're talking about the healthcare industry, transportation, our education workforce, right? Our professors and teachers who have life stuff, and also super highly technical fields like our energy sector as well, right? Where if we are going to see these tech tools come in, we need to make sure that the workers not only have a say about how they're implemented, but they're actually in command of these tools the entire time that they're being used. That's one of the few ways that we can ensure that not only we're protecting jobs, but we're seeing technology implemented in an equitable way. And then to your question about health and safety, I think one of the things that isn't really talked about as much is the fact that allowing for full automated management of workers has such a detrimental effect on worker health and safety in the workplace. I'll just use one example that has been very prevalent. We see it a lot in Amazon warehouses, for example, right? Where we know that workers are being managed by a device that is telling them they need to perform to this numerical metric, otherwise they have a threat of being fired. And all that does is force workers into this, endless need for efficiency and speed at the detriment of their own health and safety, right? They're fatigued all day, and that leads to higher risks of injury on the job, especially when we're talking about factories that are in some of the hottest areas in the state, where that is a compounding factor to their the stress on their bodies. So I think the ways in which we implement these things need to be kind of thought about in a very holistic manner. And one of the few ways that we can, again, protect workers' health and safety and the workers themselves is to implement proper guardrails on how. So we need to raise that floor so that everyone across the board is.
Thank you. When we were planning this session, I said, well, we should be ready to have a question about AI in case nobody brings it up. And I think we've heard 4 speakers or 5 today, and it very carefully and extensively and provocatively covered it, and I appreciate that. Do we have questions in the audience?
Questions.
At the moment, I have one more if there isn't. Behind the pillar there. Thank you.
Yes, I will move forward a little bit. Thank you so much for everything that you all have shared. It's been very insightful. I have a book full of notes. As I mentioned earlier to some folks, I'm a policy analyst at UCLA, and I'm also going to be beginning a PhD in industrial relations in the fall at Cornell. And so I'm thinking a lot about these questions around AI, but also about the intersection potentially with the green transition, and thinking about that's another big topic related to the future of work. And so I'm curious to what extent each of your organizations are starting to think about that. Like, are there opportunities for green jobs? Is there work that's leaving? And then also thinking about how do we think really equitably about who's going to get those jobs and what it's going to take in order to, reach our target goals around climate adaptation and all of those sorts of things.
Well, I can make a quick plug. We did a report last year that I'm happy to send you on the energy workforce in California, knowing that kind of climate change and the state's climate goals and policies are, in various ways, necessitating a change in the workforce. I think one of the problems that is well understood, but it was highlighted quantitatively in this report, is that a lot of the energy jobs that are likely to go away are good paying union jobs. I'm not quite sure about the protections there, but I suspect it's a big focus of OSHA. Whereas a lot of the new jobs coming online are kind of less skilled and regionally doesn't quite match up with those who will be losing work if the energy transition continues at the current trend. So just one kind of subset of that, the bigger kind of climate and green transition kind of issue that I think, California is at the forefront of dealing with some of the repercussions of really ambitious policy goals.
Questions?
Any other
We have time for
audience
more questions? Sure.
Hi. Let me get over here so you can see me. I didn't have a question. I just had a quick comment. So my name is Terry, and I'm a nurse practitioner. I work down at LA General Medical Center in Los Angeles. And I just wanted to say that when you were speaking about the concerns with AI, we are definitely concerned about it. I'm also a member of our Southern California Nurse Alliance, SCIU 721. And we are definitely concerned about AI. A lot of our members are concerned about, like you said, the right to know. All the bills that you were talking about, on point. We hear this every day, all the time. We already use AI as far as dictating our notes. That's okay. That's good. I'm okay with that. But we also have a system where you can call into our urgent care, and there's someone that you're talking to, and you don't know if that's AI or if it's a regular person. And so when you're a nurse like me who's trying to triage someone, you know, it's the patient's right to know that you're not talking to AI. You're talking to a human. And some of those things just can't be substituted or replaced by AI. So thank you. Thank you for all of your information.
Thank you. Any others? 1 minute. Yeah.
Got a question over. Oh, do we have time for one more?
One more. Yeah.
Quick question.
Very quick.
Quick one. Today on news, I saw Taylor Swift is going to get copyright on her voice and likeness so that AI developers cannot use that. And I was thinking that what about some protections for the workers or trades if individual workers cannot get copyright, but as policymakers or state agencies, is there any possibility of having those kind of copyrights on trades so that workers are protected somehow?
Can you hear me? I think if I understood your question correctly, it's about basically copywriting work, right? And you're right, exactly. And there have been a lot of efforts to protect image and likeness for performers, for example, right? We worked with some of the workers from the Hollywood industry, for example, to protect their image and likeness and their work. But I think that kind of points to the bigger issue of like our work is important and it's our own. And that's part of the reason why we're working on bills like 2027, right? To ensure that our work is not then being used to strip us of our humanity. So I think to your point, we are trying to work on that. And I would love to see as much work protected as I can.
I think we're going to have to wrap up. I am sorry, Liba. I know there's like so much to talk about, but thank you so much to our panelists this afternoon and for engaging in this discussion.